at a conference in Montreal, and it's been involved in a lot of interesting open source projects in the Microsoft space specifically. He's the author of Brownfield Development, and has been speaking around the world on various topics. It's a pleasure to introduce Belcham.
Okay, so thanks for coming out, first of all. Today we're going to do aspect-oriented programming as the topic. We've only got about 10 slides. We're going to code pretty much the whole day, or the whole session. We code the whole day too, what the hell. So yeah, we're going to work in Visual Studio a lot, so if you have a big objection to C#, then sorry. At least it's not VB, right? So,
why not?
Because you don't want to see me try and code VB.
So it's you, not me.
Yeah, the problem's me, for sure. The way that I like to have this specific session go is lots of question-answer type stuff. So we're going to show a couple different ways in code. Feel free to ask questions about anything at all around this topic, and if we have time at the end, we throw the floor open to anything from Adam's drinking habits to code. So
Adam drinks a lot.
So let's kick this off. How many people are familiar with aspect-oriented programming? A few of you. Anyone actually using it at work or in code at all? A couple people. So aspect-oriented programming is really just a concept. It's not a tool so much as it is a concept. We're going to look at a couple tools and implement it in a couple different ways today. But really, what we're talking about is this concept of a cross-cutting concern. So it's something that everywhere in the application could potentially want to use. The kicker with this is that when we're writing our code and we want to be able to react and change really quickly, we're doing the agile stuff, whatever, and we want to be able to make that request coming in from the business happen fast, we need to have these cross-cutting concerns structured in a way that allows us to do our stuff without having to trip all over them. So as the kind of the canonical example for aspect-oriented programming is logging, right? So if you're logging in your system, you might say, hey, I want to say that this method is being logged, or it's starting and it's ending. So you put a line in. First line of code in the method, log, method whatever, do stuff is starting. Last line of code maybe before it returns, or at the very last line of code, if it's a void, you say method do stuff has finished, that kind of thing. So while it's not a big one that we would trip over, it does add a lot of clutter in there, and it is something we have to work around when we're writing our code. So an aspect would take that stuff out, and we'll look at that today. That's the example I'm going to show you today. But we can use aspects for a ton of other things. So if you think of your code as having hopefully some layers, logical layers inside of it, what are the cross-cutting concerns that are going to happen in here? So we have this service layer. We have UI stuff above it probably. Service layer, domain model, repositories, data access, that kind of thing. We want to have them split up, but we don't want to have logging in here. We don't want to have logging wherever, that ubiquitous utilities class. Utility.log, right? That sucks knob. It's untestable. It's awful. So this is really what we're thinking of the cross-cutting concern. If you have all these concerns over here individually represented in your code, like logically structured in your code more so than physically represented in your code, you want to have your cross-cutting concerns split off and spanning that entire stack, potentially spanning that entire stack. For logging, I might not want it to go all the way up into my UI stuff, right? I just might not want to log my UI. I might not want to audit what's happening in my UI either. So they don't have to go all the way up, but they might go in there. You might have auditing only at data access, your repository layer and lower. But it's cross-cutting, right? It covers a couple of different areas in the code base. It doesn't fit into one spot. And that's what we want to try and do in our code, is make everything have its own proper place kind of thing, right? Gives us better structure, readability, discoverability, all these cool things that we want from a maintenance standpoint. Any questions about what a cross-cutting concern kind of is? There's some other great examples. These are two that I've used. Another one I'm using on a current project is we're using nhibernate as our data access layer, or data access ORM component. we're saying that anytime you come into our service layer, that's a new unit of work. So you make an entry point, we treat it as one unit of work for every method call. Just how we've done it, whether it's right or wrong. So we've wrapped an aspect here. That's all our aspect is wrapped around. It says on entry of the service layer, get a new session from nhibernate, new unit of work. On exit of the service layer, so when our code goes back up to the UI, it says wrap up that session. So commit it. If an exception is being bubbled through, roll back the unit of work, all that kind of thing. So that's another one that I commonly use. Performance monitoring. Many people have actually written performance like perfmon feed code, right? It outputs. Nobody's doing that. This is a great thing for your whole other talk, but it's a great thing to do for your application, is make your application tell you how it's working. How would you go in there normally to do it? You want to say, well, how many data access layer calls are occurring? You probably go in on every call to the data access layer, write a line of code saying, hey, it happened, hey, it happened, hey, it happened, kind of thing. Wrap it with an aspect. Then you can take it off if you want to, or move it up and say, you know what, we want it for service layer. We'll take that same aspect, wrap it around the service layer. Now we have performance monitoring capabilities from in two different places without ever injecting code into the code that is, you know, my customer's repository .save or something like that, right? So we're practicing open close principle as well by doing that. So allows us to make the change, wrap it, that kind of thing. Very, very powerful. And you can think of other ones. One that I haven't really bought, and it seems to always come up, is security. You have your security slice. I don't know how you do it properly. How do you wrap your application as a whole or in components with a security layer that's abstract enough to work in all different areas, but concise and applicable enough to the business that it's functional from the business standpoint. I've never had to try to implement security across multiple layers. Usually it's like, make it so WCF doesn't accept anyone you don't want kind of thing. It's possible, I guess, but I just don't see it as something that's really applicable here. Any other ideas of what you could do, things you might be working on? Big cross-cutting, you see it throughout your entire application type of things?
Localization.
That's a really good one, yeah. Yeah, we've got a little bit of localization aspect wrapped in our stuff. We're localizing what comes out of the service layer in our application. So we've got a small bit of aspect there that says, hey, here's the result, and it's got a key value that comes back, and we localize that and return out the text instead of the key value. So that's a really good one. Anything else? I mean, there's not tons of them, but there are some out there that you can do this with. So let's look at logging. Hopefully you guys at the back can see that. So this is kind of how logging's traditionally been done, right? You have your method, add a new customer. So this is our repository layer probably. No, this is our service layer. We put in that, hey, it was started, hey, it was ended. We do stuff in between, and then we start putting in, you know, like an exception that gets thrown on validate. Whether that's the right way to do validation or not, it's a whole nother discussion. But we log that happened, right? So you're gonna see this pattern over and over throughout all your service layer. And you're gonna have line type of thing for all the different persist, all the save or add news type of thing. It clutters up the code a lot, right? This is what I would rather see when I'm going in from trying to debug and maintain the code standpoint. Only what the code is actually doing. Who gives a shit about the logging? Right? Yeah, it should happen, but I don't need it to be right up in front of me. It just should be happening. So this is where our aspect comes in quite a bit. So what are the main tools that we can use? There's tools, all kinds of tools. There's two different styles that I wanted to go through in the presentation. The first one, Pullshark. So this is a purchase tool. It used to be free, they're charging for it now. It's a post compiler. We'll talk more about the details of that in a sec here. And then this is Castle Windsor, an IOC container. Most IOC containers have this way of, because they're feeding back out the classes, you say, hey, give me an object of this type. They can wrap them with some, it's like a proxy basically, right? They wrap it with a proxy that has in there the aspect, they call them in Windsor interceptors, but the aspect itself in there. So there's two different ways. One way is post-compile your code to add the aspects. The other way is configure it so that it has the aspects wrapped around your code at runtime. So Pullshark. So it is the post-process compiling. So what it does is it goes through, you compile your DLL, your EXE, whatever. You say, hey, Pullshark, run it for me, or do stuff on here for me, and it adds in aspect code for you. You have to define what that code is and which pieces of the code base you want it added to, but that's how it does it. So it does code weaving at the IL level. Goes in, looks at the IL, and injects a bunch of stuff. We're gonna look at that, you'll see it. It's some seriously nasty code when you decompile it. But it does work, and it does do it. Pretty much seamlessly. You'll see it when Visual Studio, you install it, it integrates in Visual Studio, you do the heck's that little window called at the bottom? That when you're compiling, it goes, bumps through and tells you what everything's going on. It says in there, running this through Pullshark, completed, whatever kind of thing. So you actually see that that step is happening. When you do Pullshark aspects, the standard style of aspect, there's three different things you can do: before, after, and on exception. Usually in your aspects, these are the three things you care about. Before my code executes, I might want to do something, log that it started as an example, or open a new session for nhibernate. On after or exit, log that it's finished, close, roll back, whatever that nhibernate session. And then on exception, and you do whatever on exception. Usually you don't swallow the exception or act on it, but you'll do something like log that the exception happened, right? The nice thing in Pullshark is that all three are optional. So you can just do an aspect that is before, or an aspect that's after, or one that's on exception only. So you have that choice of constructing the aspect very clearly how you want. The one thing I don't like about Pullshark is that it is attribute based. So I have to do a custom attribute saying this is where I want to have an aspect applied, and then go to every class or every method, depending on how I build my attribute, every class or method, and say, apply an aspect here, 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 kind of thing. It becomes really, really hard if you're doing something like logging. You might want to have the aspect on for a while and then off when you go to production, kind of thing, right? You might have detailed development logging and a different type of logging for production execution. You want to change them. To be able to do that with attributes, you have to go through and replace all the attributes. There are ways around that, but that's pretty much what happens, regardless of how you do it. So I'm not the hugest fan because of this. On greenfield code, if you have control of it, if you're working on a brownfield app where you have no control whatsoever over, or you're incapable of going and changing all the code so you can have it automatically wrap using Windsor, which we'll look at in a second, it's a great thing for brownfield code then. Because you just go in, attribute everything. Now we've got logging around every method call in the whole code base, right? Assuming you went through and put it on the whole code base. You just got to compile it and then run it through the Pullshark post compiler. So it is good in some scenarios. Don't like it in other scenarios. Not as flexible, but it does help when your code's not flexible.
So would this thing be a way of doing sprouts when you have brownfield code and you want new functionality without touching the actual original code?
You could, yeah. So really,
that's the question: is it a good idea?
Is it good? Yes, probably not. You could do it. Really, the only thing that this is doing is applying the proxy pattern to your code, right? So it's taking whatever you have and wrapping it and saying, do something before. In my proxy code, do it, run the original code, do something after, and then the difference is on exception. It'll do some stuff inside maybe, or wrap it with a try catch, which we'll see in the when we start coding here. So from a discoverability standpoint, I would say no, you don't want to do it that way. From a capability standpoint, absolutely. It's just a proxy pattern. That's all it is, right? Any other questions about Pullshark? and the post-compile one, our way of doing it. We will see some code, we'll look in reflectors, some other stuff. We'll see what it really looks like in a few minutes here. Okay, Castle Windsor. So this is Castle Windsor IOC container. You ask the container, hey, give me something of type I customer service. It gives you back a concrete object that you can work with. What you do is you use a what they call an interceptor. You implement a class or have a class that implements IInterceptor, and inside IInterceptor you say invocation.proceed. Original code.run is really what it's saying, right? And then you can wrap and do whatever else you want in this because it's just a proxy path. Before and after is really easy then, right? Do something, invocation.proceed, do something else. There's your before, your after with invocation.proceed in between them. The on exception, there is no explicit on exception. You have to say, do something, so get my before, try, on invocation, proceed, catch exception, do whatever I want, finally, and then inside the finally block, do your invocation, or do your after part of your aspect if you have one. So it's not as clear, and you'll see the difference very, very clearly when we write the code here, but it's not quite as clear how you do on exception inside of Castle Windsor. It is not as powerful. We're talking about the basic ways of doing AOP here. If you want to go out and do some really funky stuff, you're just not going to get it with Castle Windsor. So not as powerful for being able to do some really crazy stuff. It's configuration based, so we'll look at doing configuration in XML hell on this one. You don't have to do it that way with Castle Windsor. You can use the Fluent interface and set up conventions. That's what I'm doing on my current project. I've got a set of conventions I'm using. So I don't have the XML we'll look at, but the XML does make it really clear how things are happening from a config standpoint. The nice thing about having it in XML, or using XML and the Fluent, because you can blend the two with Windsor, is that you can easily go in, highlight the XML, comment it out, I don't want this interceptor on this anymore, comment it out, and start the application again. And now you've got a completely different configuration in your app, right? You've just taken an aspect off of something. So it gives you really big flexibility there. It is XML though, and that's the pain. You'll see the pain. And I'm not even going to show you the nastiness, but you'll see the pain regardless in the XML today. So that's the differences between the two. They're both very valid tools. They have their time and a place. When I sit down on a project, I say, what do we think we're going to need? We need to be able to dynamically add and remove aspects. Probably going to go configuration based and use something like Castle Windsor. If the code base is existing brownfield nastiness that I don't want to get into, I'll probably go with Pullshark, attribute the snot out of the brownfield code, and have my stuff working then. So they are good and bad, and both have their place. So, any questions? Yeah. Nothing? Everyone's done for the day? Wants to go home, have a beer? Which one do I prefer?
Yeah.
Like, if given the choice?
Yeah.
On a greenfield project, I would probably take this way, using Castle Windsor or some kind of IOC-based one. I don't like introducing extra steps to my compilation process if I don't have to. So, using this, if you're greenfield, you don't have to do the XML stuff we'll look at today. You just do it all convention-based when you register using the Fluent interface, and voila. Every time you add a class, it gets automatically registered into the container, and it has that aspect if the convention says it should. So, very, very easy. Yeah.
Do you know of any tools that work with interpreted languages?
I don't, off the top of my head. No, sorry. There is a great Wikipedia page. I don't know if I have it on the end slide here or not, about aspect-oriented programming. And it tells you all kinds of tools there. That's probably where I would go if I had to answer that question for a client or something.
The Pullshark works with a post-compile step.
Yeah.
Does it work outside of building Minute script? Or outside
Yeah.
of
So you can build it. You install it, and it works right in Visual Studio. Like when you do the setup.exe type thing install, you can run it at the command line, and so you can use it in NAND rake, socky, whatever, do your compile, and then execute whatever the command line necessary is there. I've not done that in my build script yet on a project. I've just played around with it, so I don't know how flexible it is, but it can be done. Three aspect types. So, yeah.
What about an extension point if you just really don't want to touch the code base? But
You could do it if you don't want to touch the code base. It's kind of like Rob was asking, right? You don't want to touch the code base, but you want to add something in. Maybe you need to add validation in because there's no validation on a call. So you could wrap that call with an aspect that has the validation. So you're really practicing open close principle at that point, right? I'm extending it without touching anything to do with the code that's actually going to be finally executed. So yeah, you could definitely do that. I've not done that. I would say, this is why I told Robert that I would say that's probably not a good thing, is it becomes really, really hard to discover what's going on there, right? It's one thing for you not to see the logging line entry in your code base and have it just work. It's another thing entirely for business logic to happen and you have no frickin' clue where that's coming from.
But you could add more logging to see it.
Yeah, you could. We actually ran into that problem. We ran into that problem on our stuff with the fluid registration, where we were registered on logging, and then we registered another aspect, and somehow the convention for the other aspect included wrap it with logging. So we ended up with this vicious cycle, circular thing going on, and you start up the application and you get like 7 megabytes of log file just on startup. So it's just redundantly the exact same thing over and over. Called this, called logging, called this, called logging, called this, called logging. So you got to watch for that kind of thing. You really do. Yeah.
how is it for if you want to do a configuration in real time for logging? Let's say you have an application running, and then all of a sudden you want to turn on logging for this particular namespace.
Yeah.
And turn it off again after something happened.
Yeah, so with Pullshark, you're not going to get that, right? Because you have to go in, add the attribute or some technique like adding the attribute that they offer, and then recompile it and have the post-compile process run. So it's just not going to do it that way at all. Not easily, because you'll have to recompile, redeploy, and that sucks. You don't want that if you're trying to turn on and off something like a logging piece in production. With the configuration-based stuff, if you're actually doing config file instead of convention, it's as simple as going in, commenting out a block of XML, which we'll look at because I think I got it commented out. And then you might have to restart the application. Depends on how your code base is, right? But if it's like the main process that's starting to run that you're turning that on and off, you'll most definitely have to restart your app again to get it to take up the new stuff, the new convention, or the new configuration. But sometimes you won't have to. So, you know, the big difference, if you say yes, you will have to restart it if you're doing configuration based, and so that's not good, but the worst is Pullshark. I not only have to restart it, but I have to redeploy it, recompile it. I have to go through my whole release cycle, right? So, you know, it's not as seamless as just turning on and off. What I prefer for logging is to instead use the log4net config and just turn it on and off there, or adjust it in there instead of saying, take this piece and don't log it, I just adjust the logging level, I guess it's called.
So you can do that for a namespace or for a class or for
You can in Log4net, yeah. Somebody else was going to shoot, yeah.
You mentioned discovery a few times
Yeah.
as being a challenge. Have you figured out some good rules of thumb to make stuff less?
Yeah,
like
so
layer?
what I do is I have an infrastructure namespace and then an aspects underneath it, and all my aspects go in there. When I do I'm using on my current project Castle Windsor with conventions and auto registration to get my aspects tied in. I have them, every convention is its own class that gets executed. And then if the convention has, originally when we write it, if it has, say, logging, include logging, we say that in the name of the class, right? It's register, service layer, include logging. So that's the only way that we've been able to do it. But you can't go into the code, you're not gonna jump into this and say, oh yeah, go to definition for the logging, right? There's no tie between these two pieces. So that's where the discoverability problem comes in. I treat it with naming, trying to help with naming, and then at my current client, we're doing lots of training with the support people mostly. So all the support people have to go through this training that we're setting up. And one of the big things is how do you configure logging, and how is logging going to work, and where do you go to find if it's actually turned on, that kind of stuff. So anything else before we dive into code?
Is Pullshark open source?
Pullshark is not. It used to be free. I don't think it ever was open source, but it used to be a free tool. I don't know what they're charging now, but it is charged for all the licenses, I think, now. So the one I'm running is a really, really old version because I'm too cheap to buy a license. So, but it gets the point across. But yeah, so it is a charge thing. So that's another difference that you have to weigh in there too. Okay, if there's nothing else, then we can see how badly I code in C#. Okay, and resharp chuck exception. All right, so this is the app that I have. What I've done is I've built a console app. It has a little bit of common code. There's just some fake repository services, validation type stuff in there. And then I've said, I've got a Pullshark app and version of it and a Windsor version of it to show the two different ways. And so that whatever's in common, it's just shared between the other two. It's not important what it does at all. The more important thing is going to be the pieces inside of these two projects. So we should be able to hopefully run the app here and have it spit out a little bit of logging. So, oh crap. You set how big this is. No, the width. Yeah, there. 20. You guys probably can't read that very well at the back. So we need to color in here too.
Yeah, not really.
Okay. Let's start this again. So it's not going to remember that either. Okay. Anyways, what we've got here is the app running. First line's always going to be there. It's just something I do for to make sure that my logging's set up properly. So this is using Log4net behind the scenes. It's using a console output for the whatever they call it, the provider or the writer or something. The which?
The writer.
The writer, yeah. So it's just instead of logging to a file, I'm logging to the command line. So then I go in. I've got on the Windsor side. So this is what we're going to work on first. The Windsor side. We've got customer services update started the old way, just so that we can identify between it and the aspect we're creating. And then customer service update finished the old way. So we'll see now what we're going to do is we're going to go in and add the aspect, create an aspect, add it to this this specific class, and we'll see how both of these two log, because we won't remove this logging initially. So it won't look that pretty the second time though. Okay, so if we go in here and look at our Windsor service. So this is all the service is doing. Do stuff apparently wasn't important. So we've got our update, simply like we looked at in a code on the slide. Log it, do some validation, log if there's an exception or validation fail, and log the exit. So let's create an aspect. And the way we do that inside Windsor, so this is where you'd asked about discoverability. This is kind of how I structure my where my aspects are, infrastructure, and then I just call it Windsor logging here, but I'd probably just call it logging or aspects or something like that under infrastructure. So we'll create a new class here. We'll call this, you know what? I don't know what we're going to call that. So Windsor is going to use a config file, and I need to know what the name of my aspect is, because I've already got it entered here. Logging aspect. Okay. Create the logging aspect class. So I said that Windsor uses interface, so I can say iIntercept. iInterceptor, that's from the Castle Windsor namespace. And then we implement one method. And that method is just intercept. So when I call to run any method on my original code, and it's wrapped with this interceptor, it's going to come in and run the intercept method prior to running my original code. Or that's going to be the entry point to my original. So I want, French. Okay, so first thing I'll do is I'm going to want to do an entry, run original code, and exit. So running the original code is easy, so we'll just cherry pick that first. So we'll say invocation.proceed. That says run the original code. That's all there is to that. So if we were to take this aspect and configure it now, it would run using the aspect, but it would run just normally, just like everything else. There's no other code being executed, right? So, and then I can go in and I can do log. Oh, what I want to do for this, I want to do for invocation dot target type. So this is just a convention I use in my logging. I always log what the class is that the logging's for. If I said log for this, it would always come up in the log entry saying the logging aspect class is what we're logging, and then put in the starting the logging class message kind of thing. When really I want the original class. So everything about the original class is inside invocation. So we'll add this as an info, and we'll do, so we can just say starting if we wanted to. What I usually do in my logging is I'll do a full-blown message of what is the method name that's being called, what are the parameters that are being passed in, what are the values of the parameters that are being passed in, and in the case of my current project, we're even using reflection to walk the entire object graph of complex objects coming in as parameters and structuring a log message that includes all the values all the way through it. So you can take this and we'll write this class. If we were to write all that reflection-based tree walking type stuff, you can put it on any single class you want then, and with the interceptor, and you'll get full details of all parameters going in, and we can do the same thing with the results as well. So instead of doing logging or starting here, what I'm going to do is string dot format. That's what we're looking for. And we'll say. So we already know the class. What I want is the method name. So I can look at invocation.method.name. So the method type here is just the method type from standard .NET reflection type stuff. We've got all kinds of other things that are available in there. Invocation arguments, which is a collection of objects. So this is one of the things that really sucks about the Windsor way when it comes to logging arguments. You can loop over all the arguments and look at them, but all you're getting is the value. And it's, so if it's a string, you'll get the string value. If it's a complex type like a customer, you'll get the customer instance passed in. But you don't know what the parameter's name is. So it might be string credit card number. You don't know that it's called credit card in the parameter list. So you can't go and say credit card number : value inside your log file very easily. So that's one of the things that is a drawback from the logging standpoint, to be able to do that kind of thing. Not that you'd ever want to log your credit card numbers to a file, yeah. So what I've done is I usually take, instead of having just name here, I'll have another class that's whole job is to parse the invocation arguments, so I'll pass the invocation to that class, and it'll parse the arguments, take the name, construct this string value, and then inside of there, I have a configurable piece that says, here are the things you should watch for, and don't log. So don't log something that comes through that's a credit card number, things like that. And to do that, I have to do more reflection to be able to find out what the parameter name is or the argument name is, and things like that. But it is possible to do. So you get this argument 0 thing down here. These are in the exact same order as they are when you go look at the method signature. So it's possible to match it up. You just got to reflect on that method on the class, and then find the arguments and their names and all that kind of crap, right? So
is there nothing in invocation that gives you those names? You actually have to go and get
you
the
have
class
to go.
name?
You have to go and get it. Yeah.
So how would you do that from that point? 'Cause you have
To get the argument
You
names.
have the target types, I'm figuring you could probably.
Yeah, I have the target type, so I use the target type. I can do target type. Get method, invocation, method name, dot, call it arguments. What the hell's it called in here? Parameters. Yeah. So now I've got my parameters. It's going to return that in the same order as the list of values. So you start doing stuff like that inside of it to get it. One big concern a lot of people have is the amount of reflection that my logging code has. I've never seen it take a performance hit on an app. If it does take a performance hit, it's pretty easy to turn it off. And so if it does get to production and it starts sucking wind, then I just can turn it off and figure out how to solve the problem in the meantime. Right? So that's how I would do my starting. I would do basically the exact same thing for ending. And then I can do here, I could do, instead of doing the parameters being passed in, I can do invocation dot return value. And there's what the, in this case, or in most cases it would be void, so you might put a little logic in there to say, if it's void, don't format the string with that, or whatever, right? But you can get the return value complex type. It just returns an object, so you have to figure out how to, through reflection, walk that object if it's a complex type, or just if you think it's always going to be a simple primitive type, just do toString on it or something like that, right? So all of these values, everything about what's happening in your method call is available to you. With the exception of how long did it take to run, things like that. But you can put that in here. I've done that. For one project, we wanted to know how long every method was taking and dump the values somewhere so that we could do some analysis because they didn't want us investing in perfmon for some reason. So we did a logging call just like this, but instead on entry we had an entry that said time of start execution. Then down below the exit we had a time of end execution, and we matched them up with a GUID for each one, and then we could go in and pair them. And basically what we did was we wrote it all to a text file so that we could go in and parse it into something that we could report off of that looked like a graph, like you get out of perfmon. So it was really, really useful in the end. Not at all. Just use perfmon if you have that problem. So this is what we've got there. Aspect done. That's all there is to writing an aspect in using Castle Windsor. So now we need to be able to go in. If we go and run this right now, we're just going to see the exact same. Ooh, it did save the stuff. we're gonna say see the exact same thing as before, because we haven't hooked that aspect up to any classes yet. So, the way you do that, and this is where that XML piece comes in. So this is Castle Windsor config file. It's just a configuration, just like you would have inside of web config, app config block. Then you have components. These are all the pieces that Castle Windsor is responsible for. So we've got a component for our service, for our validator, for our repository. And what we need to do is say, add in another component for our logging aspect. So tell Castle Windsor, hey, we've got this class out there that you should be able to, and responsible for dishing out. And then the next step after that is to put in an interceptor on the component that we want to have the logging wrapped around. So all this is saying is when I ask for, this actually says, when I ask for customer service, give me customer service and wrap it with the logging aspect, which is what's defined right here, which is that class that we just wrote. So if you're doing config, this is all you have to do. And you can add in multiple interceptors if you want.
Is that per component?
Per component, this is where it starts to suck.
Yeah.
So if we want to go down here and do update custom validator, then we have to do,
Use this thing for some form of automated testing where you check pre and post conditions and an aspect, and then sort of integration test scenario.
sure.
Yeah, but that's usually something I don't know.
You're coming up with some bad ideas today.
It's just testing you.
There's other tools out there that can do this for you that are meant to do it, but there's no reason you couldn't. The nice thing is, like, the thing that you could do with that scenario is you could have your whatever you want to call it, testing type interceptor, and then when you go to production, you could just remove it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So it no longer, you're not putting anything in your code really, other than having a testing aspect floating around your code.
It's just that every aspect, the aspect-oriented demos and so on are always about logging.
I know.
I'm trying to make it.
Logging's easy, man.
I know, but I'm looking at something
I'm a
far-fetched.
presenter, not a coder.
There's always the raise property change,
Yeah.
aspect.
Yeah. Yep, you could do, yes, is it raise property change on value changed?
On
in-
every property.
Yeah,
with a
you could start doing that if you really wanted to as well. That aspect would be really hard to write, really hard to
Why
write.
is that?
Because of the different types of, when it changes, where do you report to? Could be different every time. It could be all the different types you've got to manage now. Like I think it would be really hard to do. It would be a good challenge though. Feel free to do it. But I personally wouldn't do it myself. So I personally try to avoid on property change or on value change if I can. So yeah, this is what you got to do for every component. You got to go and add it in. And you've got to go and add it in, and then we'd have to add it in down here. So this is where the XML piece really starts to suck. Right? We've got 3 components here. Last time I used XML on a project, we had 380 components registered in the XML. And you're not even seeing the nastiness of it. Like this stuff here, wow. We don't have any generics in here, I don't think. Yeah, no generics in here at all. So that's when it gets ugly.
Okay, that's just using like something they provided for parse text. You could go write something that's more intelligent like wildcard.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because it's open source, you can go look at their XML
Yeah.
loader and actually.
There's probably, you could probably do an interceptor on the way interceptors are registered in their code, right? Write an extension.
But you-
And then say, you know what, it's when I register it, it doesn't have an interceptor, but it's in the right namespace, so like it's, you know, my company, iglecoder.demo.star, so everything,
Yeah.
if it's in that namespace, then we register an interceptor for it.
This is just
Yeah.
using their thing in default.
This is the built-in way, but you probably could build an extension point for it.
We should use this.
We should use a lot of things. Okay, so now we've registered this. Let's go ahead and run it. This is actually going to do more than I wanted because I added that second one in. So I've got update is starting. I don't have my code configured to show the class names here, my logging. So we've got our initialized, update is starting. and then the old way started. So you can see that it's wrapped around the outside there. Then we've got our that validation one that I put on the other aspect entry and the components config for. Then we end, and then our aspect ends. So that's all it takes to get the logging on there. Really, really fast, really easy. Assuming you're already using IOC, right? It does make that assumption. So, any questions about what we did there?
Is the fluid config getting more powerful in terms of setting up the interceptors, or is it just repetitive using the Fluent C# config versus the XML?
The Fluent is way less repetitive.
Okay,
so your Fluent registration for Windsor would say something like register all types in the services namespace, however that happens in the Fluency, right? And then you say like something like .add interceptor, and then you say what type of interceptor, and that's it. So everything that's auto-registered through that namespace auto-registers with an interceptor on it. So it's just another dot is all you do basically. So yeah.
Actually, the examples of other things you can use, I believe we're using an interceptor to walk through the namespace for a bunch of WCF services and actually dynamic build the config for the services.
Yeah, you could do that as well, I think.
So you don't have to write all the XML crap that it wants for all the services anymore.
Doesn't it read that on startup of the service though? In IIS or self-hosted?
No, it's if you hook the thing that actually creates the service.
Oh, okay, yeah, so you're hooking WCF to hook an interceptor.
Yeah, and then it reflects over and builds as you
Yeah.
build config.
So there's interceptors on all kinds of different things as well, or the interceptor style pattern. WCF, one of the things I use it, have built for it is an interceptor on incoming requests that spins up my Hibernate session again, right? But I'm not using Windsor or anything else to do it in that case. There is an interceptor point that you can use in WCF. And Hibernate has them. If you want to do auditing on a save, you can write something in there, inject code. It's like writing an aspect to do your auditing inside the data access piece.
You only get one.
You only get one in Hibernate, yes. With WCF, you get as many as you want if you can figure out how to use it. It's really hard. It took me about 3 months of hacking around to make it work. But when it works, it's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Okay, so that's how we would do the interceptor stuff with Castle Windsor. So if I want to go in and get rid of this validator one, quick comment it out, run the app, now the validator stuff's gone, right? So that's where you get that configurability. Again, it did compile and re-release, or restart the app, sorry. And well, I guess in this case it didn't compile, but it did restart the app, so I did need to. So it's not a seamless change, like a hot change, but it is a change that you can make. So that's, I would never do this on a project now. I would do the fluency stuff instead. I find that turning stuff on and off isn't a huge requirement to be able to do on the fly anymore. So I would do the fluency, and I would not do the XML. I mean, you're not even seeing the half of how bad this is with the XML. Throw in something that's got 3 generic types on an interface, and then your world of hurt starts popping up.
Could you reserve that config then for things such as which classes to listen to?
You could, yeah. So one of the things you can do is, and I've not got it working, but apparently it does work. I didn't spend much time with it. Is use a fluency to register, and then have this sitting in the background. And so it doesn't register this component the second when it comes in and reads the config file. It just adds the interceptor on for it. So you register it with the fluency, and then you get the dynamic changeability through this. It's a blended approach, right? So you can do that. I didn't spend a lot of time trying to make it work, but it was something that we considered when we started my current project for sure. Okay, so that's Windsor. So one of the great things, how many people are actually using IOC at all? So a few of you. This is one of the great things about IOC is I want to use the Pullshark components now. So I'll just copy, comment out all of the Windsor ones, comment, run my app, and you can see now that we're getting the Pullshark method running. So that's a great thing. IOC, if you want to do that plug and play changeability really quick, that's there's your selling point there. I mean, you wouldn't change that for that reason, but you can do it that easily with registration type stuff. Exact same pattern here. If we go look at this class, inside Pullshark for services, it looks exactly the same. Well, minus the commented out do stuff. It looks exactly the same as the other one. Oh, actually, you know what? We forgot to do something in the Windsor one. We didn't handle exceptions. Usually you want to log the exception happening, right? I don't want to have it everywhere I have a catch and handle exception, have a log entry there. So to do that, the wrong key, obviously. Help is Control and J. Okay, anyways, so I would just do try. It's what?
It's supposed to be county.
Is it? Oh, okay. So I would just throw a try around it and bubble it up, and then I would put my logging. You don't need to see me write more logging code. But I would put my logging in there. I would need to have my exception.
Clearly.
Yes. A couple more seconds and Clippy's gonna pop up and say, I think you want to write an interceptor. How can I help you? That's how you have to handle on exception cases. So it's not as pretty as it could be in my mind, right? You're relying on exception handling code to be written. It clutters up the steps that are going on a little bit, that kind of thing. But it's still fully functional.
And it's very explicit.
It's very explicit, yes. You'll see how much more explicit Pullshark is, though.
Well, is there any possibility in an exception to go back to the implication in any way?
I don't think you can.
Because you can retry it maybe.
Yeah, you have to do invocation.proceed again, probably.
That's evil.
Yeah, you're gonna have to do proceed, but yeah, why do you do that? And that would screw with some course code person bad.
Modify the parameters and try it again.
But don't log what the parameters are now. So that's how you would handle the third scenario, right? Starting or before the code executes, after the code executes, and when an exception occurs. Okay, so exact same thing in our Pullshark. And what we need to do is, like the other one, we just need to create a class. And we're going to call this log this attribute. So you guys know if you suffix an attribute or a class with the name attribute, when you go to use it as an attribute drops off. It's one of those bizarre things that they did in the framework. So what's the namespace here? You don't have to know. As long as you have to inherit from an attribute type class. Using Pullshark.mouse. I don't know why they call this mouse, but maybe it just sounds badass or something. So there should be on method boundary aspect. On method boundary aspect, that's what you implement, is that class. There's a whole bunch of other ones that you could do as well. And these are for some of the funkier ones. You can just do an on exception, on field access. There's all kinds of different ones, but the standard one, the corollary for what we just saw is on method boundary. And then we do public override, and we have on entry, public override, on exit, public override, on exception.
Do the interceptors have access to the object that they're wrapping? Because I mean, they're just dynamic proxies, right?
Yeah, so that's what, in the case of the castle one, that's what invocation is, really. Is
But you can only call the...
You can only call the method
You
that's
can't call anything else.
So you're not going to be able, unless you do target tag, you might be able to use a little bit of reflection, get that actual instance out of there. You'd have to cast it around, and you might be able to. I've never had the need.
D in the containers though, right?
Yes. So I've never had the need to do that. Usually you only want to just execute it. You don't want to go off and do other things with that same object.
I'm still trying to figure out how to do the race coverage change.
No. Keep figuring. So these ones here, this is a little bit different. So we've got a base on entry that we could just use, but usually you want to do your own thing, right? Like here we'll do log for sort of event args. Instance get type dot name. Oh, sorry, just get type is all I need to put in there. Info. String format. 0 starting and event args dot method dot name. So pretty similar, right? The thing here is we don't have to do invocation dot proceed. You want to talk about a hard bug to find? Is that day that I forgot to put invocation dot proceed inside the logging aspect and nothing ran in the application.
Said it was running.
Yeah, the log says it got executed, but if you don't have invocation dot proceed, you're screwed. So this one here, you don't have to do it. Instead, you're just explicitly saying, here's the piece I want to execute before, after, and when an exception is thrown. So all that other stuff that we built in the other one, the infrastructure, or the structure of how things are, is all being handled by Pullshark in this case. Like the Windsor's invocation, event args has all kinds of stuff on it. We have, so for the exception, there's a flow behavior you can set, I've never used. Get the read-only argument, get a writable, so you, somebody said you could change the values and try again. Use the writable array, you change the values for the arguments on start, and that's what gets passed into the actual execution of the code. So you can really do some powerful things with that. If you get the array, you get the type. You get a typo. Oh, I thought I got something else up. But in this case, you can actually get the name of what the parameter is that's being passed in. So it's much easier to say, credit card number, value. You have both of those two pieces without having to go through reflection. So,
These attributes, can they have parameters as well?
yes. Yes. So I've written
anything similar to that.
I've written this one to do.
You use something similar with the interceptors in Castle when you're using attributes?
You can't do it with a parameter. You'd have to go off and read it from a config file of some kind to get this type of thing. But yeah, I could do this if in French mode again. So I can do something like that. When I go to use the attribute, I can then define, actually turn it on or off. In this case, it's pointless because you just delete it or don't comment it out or anything instead.
So in this one, if I wanted the time, how long the invocation took.
Yes.
How would I get the start and ends wrapped around the entry on exit?
You do something like private, I don't know, what would you use to do measured time? Drawing your plan?
Time span?
Time span, yeah. Private time span. It's like, what would be start? Start value or something like that.
Just use date time.
Yeah, but and then you would,
Yeah.
everything's just.
So it's creating a new instance of.
It's creating a new instance every time it executes, yeah. So yeah, I would do something like that and then make use of it inside the on entry and on exit, right? So,
Because the other one, you can just put a local variable around it.
yes, yeah. That's all you do with local variable. So I'm gonna kill this do logging thing because it's just confusing. So you do the exact same thing for on exit. There's a return value. On exception, instead of having to do the try catch, all you do is your log entry here, and it allows its infrastructure bubbles the exception through for you automatically. I think there might be a way to stop the exception from continuing on. There might be exception, no, that's actual exception itself. So there might be a way for you to stop it from bubbling up, but normally you don't want to do that, swallow the exception anyways in an aspect. So, but all you're doing in here, if you're doing a logging aspect, it's quite literally override 3 methods, write 3 lines of code, done, or whatever you need to do your proper log entry. So for us to make use of that now, we go to customer service, and we want to put it on update. That's what you got to do. So instead of having that config file or using conventions, every place that we want to log, we've got to go through and do that. So if I did, there's a repository in here somewhere. I want to have it on the repository. I would have to go to the method and say log this. So it becomes much harder to add it in after the fact. There's a lot of grunt work. You're going to miss places, things like that from it. So that's why I call it log this. It's really clear. Log this attribute becomes very clear inside the code that that's what's exactly happening here. So any questions about this? If we run it, we'll see, hopefully, oh, you know what? It's not going to work. Boom. I didn't want to do that either. Log this attribute has to be, how do you spell that? Has to be serializable. It's one of those things that you sit in a presentation and you're like, why the hell won't it work for hours on end? So we didn't have the end one in there, and we didn't put the method name or anything in, but that is our on entry aspect running there.
The serializable requirement, doesn't it kind of get in the way of some other frameworks, such as Sharp architecture?
It can. It absolutely can.
Yeah.
So it's something I'm not particularly fond of. This is an older version. I don't know if they've changed it, but I'm not fond of it at all. So the thing we really want to see here is using reflector. Here is our DLL that we just compiled, and we want to look at services, customer service, disassemble. Whoa. Whoa. Oh, okay, thought it was going to crash on me. Okay, so there's update. Looks quite a bit different than what we wrote, eh? It's really hard to see in the back. Unfortunately, a reflector doesn't zoom up very well. So it does some allows event args thing. So this is all the stuff it's injecting. A try block, so that we can have a catch exception, so that we can run the log this attribute till the what on exception pass in the args. Right, so it's added that try catch in automatically for us. It's doing inside the try. This line here is doing, so it creates the arguments, and then this line here does the on entry. Then you get some flow behavior stuff that we didn't configure. Then our actual code, right? This is what our code was, is this log 4 to this log 4. And then we've got a aspect down here for that probably is on success, I'm guessing, and then this is on exit down inside the finally. And that's it. So that's what the post compiler is doing for us, is injecting all that code in there. And it's some seriously ugly code to read when you decompile it. It works though. How often are you going to be in here reading this? Right? It's scary when you look at it, but how often are you going to be looking at this is the thing that I always look at.
You mentioned having to train some of the people so that when they're looking at log messages, they can sort of figure out where they're coming from.
Yeah.
What's that training like?
We sit down and we look at how it's coded to do logging.
Yeah.
And we generate a whole crap load of log files. And then we walk through everyone. We break the application, so we get exceptions. We do successful runs. We do ghost diagnostics. Like all the different types of scenarios you're going to run into in support.
Yeah.
And we go through and solve them and show them the tools they have to solve them. Like what will it look like in the log file? What will it look like, you know, over here? Where do you go if you see this? Where should you go? Things like that. So,
But is that because of choosing to do it through an aspect, or is that just general best practices?
it's because, part of it's best practices. Part of it's because it's not easy to see where that log entry is in the code, right? They're used to, in my case, my current client, they're used to walking in and saying, oh, hey, we've got this log entry right here. It got to there, right? It's the brute force logging thing where you see code that's got log 1, log 2, log 3, right? It didn't make it to number 4. It broke in between 3 and 4 then. So they're used to that style. They're not used to having to look at it and say, oh, it's a class name and it may or may not have the line number that it threw the exception on, depending on if we deploy the PDD or not. And so they're not used to going and looking at the code without the log entries. So it's a discoverability thing as well, as a good practice to train thing.
Do you worry about the stack trace being put into the log file, or?
It just go the way that I do it, wherever my on exception is being handled, I put in message, can't remember, I pass the exception into log4net is what it is, and log4net does whatever it does, which I get the whole stack trace then, right? So the only thing you worry about there is do you get line numbers or not, and that's just a decision of am I going to deploy PDVs or not, really. So that's Pullshark. If we look inside of Visual Studio, I think it's the output. Nope. Yep, it should be in here. There we go. Again, this doesn't scroll or doesn't do a very good job, but somewhere in there it's running it. Here we go, this right here, Pullshark, side-to-side compatibility, blah, 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 and then it actually executes the Pullshark post compiler right there. So you can see that it's being run. How it's being run is a totally different thing, but it is happening when you do the build. So. Any questions about Pullshark code weaving? Yep.
So having pushed your logging into an aspect, what has that saved you?
I don't ever have to think about writing logging code ever again. It's really what it saves me. I just write code. I solve the business problem and it gets logged. That's all I'm doing anymore, right? It just happens. We did our aspect, push our logging in there. We just kind of forgot about it. It's there, right? It's not right in front of you every day. Probably, I don't know, let's say 2 months, 3 months after we did that, I decided to start paying really close attention to what was in the log file, do a review of what we were logging. And if you started up our app, started up open page 1, you get 70K worth of log entries. And I can tell you exactly what code executed through that entire startup process. Frozen exception. One of our practices on our dev team is, and this is more of a business requirement than a practice that I normally use. Existing apps at this client, they don't have good logging, and that was a complaint from the support people, so we decided, hey, we'll treat support like a first-class client, end user type of thing, and we'll do logging to meet their needs. So we debug all of our defects that come in, we debug them with the log file, just like they would if the defect came up in production. And if we can't debug it with a log file, we figure out why, and we make sure that we log better. But that's the only time we pay attention to logging, is on defect resolution. The rest of the time, it just happens. That's the great thing, it just happens. Add another service layer down Classic, it's logged. Change the parameters that are being passed into a method call. I don't have to go and fix the log line, the first one saying these are the new parameters, here's the values. It just happens. And that's the big benefit for us, right? It's way less work, we're way faster.
So by having that, if you would put enough log statements in to be able to debug everything based on a log, it would be a total mess.
Yes. If you have log4net set up in debug mode, if you did it manually, you'd have a crap load of extraneous code that you never want to look at. So we've eliminated that, and then instead we generate a crap load of log file entries, and we configure that and say in debug mode, we'll get 70K on startup of the app. If we move it to our production setting, which is on error, I think, or something like that in Log4net, we get like 8 lines on startup, and that's it. So that's how we handle, keep the code clean is a byproduct of using the aspect. That's very nice. And then the configurability to configure the fact that we're logging just frickin' everything, and you don't always want to see it. So somebody over there had a hand, yeah.
You're using Castle Windsor, right?
Yes.
So if you, on other layers of your application, so if your domain is something coming from an ORM, you can have those intercepted as well.
Yep. We have, when we log our parameters going in and out of methods, we have a filter to say what should and shouldn't be logged. We have a convention that says don't walk the structure of domain objects and log all the values. It's nothing worse than loading up a collection, lazy loaded, and going to log it, and it walks the structure, and you're like, why the hell does it perform like shit still? So you have to watch for stuff like that with it, specifically the domain model. So we don't log the values in our domain model objects when they're passed around as parameters, and we're not having a problem with that being too little information. But you have to do that, otherwise, how the hell are you going to stop it from triggering the lazy loading? So.
And Pullshark has some other options for other than just method manager?
Yep, they have.
Are they evil?
Are they evil? Is that what you said? I've never thought of it that way.
Wasn't there a field access or something?
There was on-field access.
Is there any legitimate reason for that?
I have no idea because I've never used anything other than on-boundary. So, what does on-field access have actually?
There it is.
On get and set. I don't know why you would do that. Yeah. There's on method invocation, so I'm guessing that was only on entry.
Is there something constructor related?
Oh, there might be. No, it doesn't look like it. No, I don't see it. Well, it might be something in there that does it or has it available, but I don't see it. I guess we could.
How would you hook construct?
Yeah, construction.
You
I don't know.
have to do that in the IOC container.
You would probably have to do it in the IOC container.
Yeah.
You'd have to, if you're using Windsor, you would create a lifestyle manager, custom lifestyle manager, and then do whatever you wanted to, and then say, yeah, it just does normal life, whatever the configured lifestyle is after. So we're doing some lifestyle stuff, custom lifestyle stuff, treating it as an aspect so we're in our code base, we're doing WinForms app, and we want it to be very rich UI. So we built a event aggregator, and we're using that. So we just say it's pub sub. We just publish an event. Whatever forms in the application are listening can deal with it and do whatever fancy stuff they want to. But we need to remove a form from the subscription, so unsubscribe it when that form closes. It's no longer open. We don't want that instance floating around inside our pub sub. We're using Custom Lifecycle Manager to do our registration and our unregistration of our objects. And that's another aspect, right? It is an aspect. It's a very isolated, very focused aspect, but it is an aspect. So when we register all of our screens, our presenters is what we register into our container. Our convention says when we register presenters, put the interceptor for logging on it and use a custom lifestyle manager, and we get the logging plus the pub sub registration under registrations. Anything else code wise? I got like one slide left, man. I want to keep that one slide bad. It says wrap up on it. Oh, recap, sorry. I don't even know my slide deck. So I guess what I wanted to finish with here is just that there are the two main different ways of doing aspect-oriented programming. One is code weaving of some kind, and the other one is through configuration and wrapping using proxies and that kind of thing. Both have their good points, both have their bad points. both should be used in the appropriate situation. Neither one of them is a silver bullet by any stretch, right? You gotta use the right one at the right time. Just because I'm using Castle Windsor to do mine doesn't mean it's right for you. It's not right for my next project. I don't know at this point, right? So definitely look at both. Yeah, if you have any questions, catch me now. Email, Twitter, probably better not to subscribe to my Twitter, it tends to be very angry. Just a little bit. My blog, Adam, do you know if you guys are putting up materials anywhere?
Yeah, we will be. I mean, there's sessions that are taped will be up on the AgileVancouver.ca site.
Okay.
So
So we'll have like a slide deck up there as well and code if we want to. Okay, so that stuff will be there, or my blog. I'll actually try and remember to put it up on my blog. Got to break that 2-month streak of no blogging. So yeah, shoot me questions about this, anything else. If you want to talk after, we can do that too. I've got 2 licenses here. The Pullshark guy saw that I was talking about this and just out of nowhere said, hey, give a couple licenses to me. So how do we want to do this? Last 2 people standing.
Do you want to keep one for yourself?
But no, I'll give one. If they send me the email giving me free ones to give away, I'm pretty sure I can call them and ask them for a free one for me. So I'd rather give them both away to you guys. We won't do like I did when I was in India talking. I said, who came from the farthest, not realizing I don't understand the geography of India at all. And then worse, there are 2 people from opposite sides of Bangalore. And first guy says, oh, I'm from Bangalore. I'm like, dude, we're in Bangalore. You didn't come anywhere to get here. Not knowing it was Mangalore. And then someone else was from Chennai. And so finally we get the whole Bangalore thing sorted out. And I'm like, okay, so Mangalore and Chennai, which one's farther away? They're both the same. So something other than geography. I don't know. Anybody really want one? Bad? Really bad? Don't be shy. Nobody cares. Come on.
You use Windsor for free.
I know. Yeah, but you can use this for free now too.
But Windsor, you get the source and you can
Yeah.
go and look at how they do things and change it.
Okay, whoever the first 2 people to come up and ask for one after we're done here can have it. So, thank you very much for both having me and coming to the session. And hope you enjoy tomorrow and whatever's happening Thursday, Friday.
yeah,
Thank you.
perfect. So just before we wrap up, there's a couple of housekeeping things. There is a way to vote for the session. There's gold coins in one bin, and just place it in the green for good, and it's not real gold, so don't take it with you. Green for good, red for bad. Just place your vote on the way out. No need to fill out a survey or anything like that. And from Agile Vancouver, we'd like to present you with a nice bottle of wine for coming down and presenting. Thank you again.
A little bit.
It's,